Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me say how much I appreciate my colleagues on the floor, particularly Senator Bennett's comments and the passion that everyone has shown for the people in this country and why we are here. Why we are here for the people that we represent, whether they voted for us or not. That's not the issue. We are here to represent all the people, and I really appreciate those incredible words from my colleagues, and particularly the passion showed by Senator Bennett. Mr. President, I'm rising today to give my voice to the thousands of Alabamians who are also suffering as a result of this government shutdown. And it's not just the folks that are employed, but those that are affected by this shutdown with whatever means necessary. There are people that are not employed by the government that are also affected. You know, in the midst of all the political posturing that we've seen, the costly government shutdown has hurt over 5,100 Alabama workers, their families, and the people who rely on them to do their job. Thousands more are contractors who won't get back pay. Unlike the federal workers that traditionally get back pay, these contractors that are not working now because there is no work to be had with the federal government will not get back pay from their employers. Our Coast Guard employees who aren't paid through the Department of Defense and their budget that passed this year, the Coast Guard, they don't know whether or not their next paycheck will come or not. And by the way, it's the Coast Guard who is interdicting so much of the illegal drugs that are attempting to come into this country. It's not the southern border, it's the Coast Guard that we're putting at risk who is doing the best job of interdicting the illegal drugs that are attempting to come into this country. These folks pay the price of this shutdown, while this political drama that we have seen in Washington, D.C. drags on and on and on cable TV and on Twitter and other social media platforms. These folks are hard-working Alabamians who keep our airports safe, they protect our communities, they monitor our prisons. We have 3 federal prisons in Alabama. 3 of the workers in the Aliceville prison were on CNN today talking about the effect on them and their community, their small community in Aliceville, Alabama. These are people who support our national defense, folks at Redstone Arsenal and on all the military bases in our state. They support the aerospace programs in our state. These are the folks that are getting hurt. Many of these people are veterans who have gone on to serve their country a second time by working in federal service. Most of these folks support strong border security. In fact, I would venture to guess all of them support strong border security. Some will support the wall, as the president has described it. But they don't agree. They don't support shutting down the government of the United States of America in a way to just get that wall or that border security done. They do not support that at the expense of their communities and their families. Over the past 18 days or so since this shutdown, I've heard from any number of my constituents. They call the office here in Washington. They call the offices in Huntsville and Mobile and Birmingham and Montgomery. And they talk about how they are hurting already because of the shutdown. One constituent who wrote to me is a small business owner in North Alabama near Huntsville, whose 30-plus employees have provided very important continuous support for NASA programs for the past 7 years. As their work is delayed or stopped altogether, these folks don't know whether they're going to have a job, because if their work stops, those employees are going to need jobs, and they're going to start looking for other jobs. In an economy that we've got now where unemployment is low, people are looking for workers, and they're going to find those jobs, and this business may get shut down. There was a military spouse who also works for the federal government and whose husband is deployed to Afghanistan right now. She also wrote me urging to end this shutdown. She said that while she supports the wall, she doesn't believe that federal employees should be used as a bargaining chip just to get it done. She said that a lapse in funding A lapse in funding would be devastating for her job, and her family needs the paycheck to cover these bills. This is a family that is already living under stress with their husband and father in Afghanistan. They don't need the extra stress. On behalf of the family of 4 in Smith Station, Alabama, another mother wrote to me about their lapse in health care coverage because of the shutdown. Because employees at the Federal Health Insurance Agency, GEHA, have been furloughed. Her family's change in coverage was never fully processed by the end of the year, and they lapsed, and it was canceled as of December the 31st. They're now facing important medical decisions, appointments, prescriptions, refills in the next few weeks, but don't know if they're going to have the insurance to cover. Today, the administration announced that the deadline for farmers to receive their subsidies because of the administration's trade policies will be extended, which all sounds really great. Sounds all good and well. We're going to extend that. We're going to put a Band-Aid on this for our farmers. These farmers have been hit hard by the trade war that this administration has started. I've talked about that on the floor, this floor of the Senate on any number of occasions and around my state. So to ease that pain a few months ago, the administration decided to allocate $12 billion as a bailout almost. Now, these farmers really don't want these handouts. They want their markets. But to ease the pain, to their credit, the administration came up with $12 billion to ease that pain. But less than half of that amount, roughly about $5.2 billion in payments were made before the Department of Agriculture offices, the local offices, were closed. Only less than half. So while extending that deadline sounds very good, and it is simply putting a Band-Aid over the wound, the fact is that until we get this government open, farmers who did not get their payments in before this shutdown are going to see a problem. The problem with the shutdown more because they can't depend on the federal government any more than they can depend on the weather. These farmers are at risk every season, every year of things out of their control. What they don't need is a government that they cannot depend on. And that's what we have right now. They're out of luck at a time that they need it most as they are starting to plan for their spring plan and summer planting. Their loans, their crops, buying the seed, as Senator Bennett talked about a few moments ago. There's one constituent that wrote me a really heartbreaking letter about the fact that the impact of losing her SNAP benefits after January 31st if the shutdown continues. She's living on a razor's edge financially and depends on Social Security disability benefits. And those benefits and those SNAP dollars she needs to survive. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of money on a monthly basis. It's such a small amount of money that folks on this body and folks in the House and certainly the folks in the administration wouldn't think twice. It is probably less than they spend at Starbucks every morning. But for her, it's an incredibly important part of her life. And we have to make sure that we do everything not to let her down. Now, I did see just before I came over here that the administration has said that we're going to extend that. We're going to make sure that SNAP benefits are paid in February. Well, again, that's great, and it sounds wonderful, but it's a Band-Aid. And sooner or later, if we don't end up doing something about this shutdown, that Band-Aid is going to be ripped off. And these folks are going to be left in the cold once again. And we need to remember, and I think this gets lost sometimes in the talk about this shutdown, that this is not just about the paychecks and the benefits, direct benefits that people in this country receive from the federal government. It also is affecting all those people in our communities who serve those who work for the government, who take in their grocery money and take in their utility money and take in their gas money. It's going to affect those people. It's going to affect car dealers. It's going to affect the local businesses. Just like the folks in Aliceville at the prison said today that sooner or later, if they don't have money to be spent around Aliceville, it's going to affect that community. Mr. President, this touches so many people in this country that we need to not lose sight of that. The letters and calls and voicemails that are pouring in every day, the shutdown continues. More and more Americans are facing increasing consequences of the impasse that we see here in Washington, D.C. There is, simply put, no excuse for it. We can and must do better. We can and must find the common ground that so many of us talk about. Every day we hear it over and over about talking about finding common ground. But we got to practice what we preach in terms of finding that common ground. You know, this past year, I've talked to a number of my constituents back home. We've gone through a number of issues. And I've talked to a lot of people who've asked me to support the wall. They always say, they stop me over the holidays. And I would always stop and talk to them. They were always very respectful, unlike some things that happen in our political discourse today. These people were always very respectful, and we had a nice conversation. And when I asked them what they were talking about when they said that I needed to help vote for a wall, they said, we need border security, Senator. We need border security, which gave me the opportunity to say, I completely agree. Unfortunately, the so-called wall that we keep hearing about primarily on Twitter has become really just a metaphor. To support the wall is to support a secure border. To oppose it is to oppose a secure border. That makes no sense. What's getting lost in this debate is that every member of this body wants secure borders. Every member of this body, every member of the House wants border security measures that will keep our communities safe. We might have disagreements about the best way to make sure our borders are secure. We might have disagreements on what border security will look like, but it doesn't mean that we want open borders, as I keep hearing from the administration. That is a preposterous statement. In fact, in last Congress, when we had the nominee, one of the president's nominees for the head of ICE, he used to work on the border. He was there. He controlled it. He was ahead of the border security. And I asked him in the hearing, have you ever heard one politician, have you ever heard anybody in Washington, D.C., that they are for open borders? He said, no, sir, not at all. So we've got to get away from that political posturing so that we can find the common ground necessary to move this forward. In fact, the matter is, we have found common ground. We have found that common ground right here in this body. Last February, in the midst of bipartisan talks on a more comprehensive immigration reform, a number of senior administration officials came to the Senate and briefed members on the situation on the border. They outlined how an infusion of money in the context of a larger piece of legislation could improve security and conditions for asylum seekers and on the border. In the wake of that presentation, and I think, if I recall correctly, that they proposed a $25 billion price tag for border security. In the wake of that presentation, Republicans and Democrats alike, a majority of the United States Senate, voted to include that $25 billion in border security funding over the next decade. That was a bipartisan effort. Over the course of the last spring and early summer, the Senate Appropriations Committee, the United States Senate Appropriations Committee, led by my colleague from Alabama, Senator Shelby, and Senator Leahy, the ranking member, passed a bipartisan Homeland Security funding bill by a vote of 25-5. They did that in June of this year, and that included $1.6 billion in border security funding. That was on top of the $1.3 billion, I think, that was funded last year. So today, what has started this whole process is the administration demanding a blank check of $5.6 billion for a wall as the price to reopen the government. That is simply not how our government should work. Now, candidly, and in all fairness, in recent days, we've gone from an argument that was just simply about dollars and cents on both sides of the aisle. It was simply about dollars and cents, 5.6 versus 1.6 or 1.3. We've now seen the administration beginning to slowly roll out how they would actually spend that money. There was no plan in the beginning. It was just send us $5.6 billion. We're learning about that plan via Twitter and on the TV talk shows, not the way that this body is used to getting information from the administration, and that is through a budget process or through some proposal that comes that you can ask questions and you can vet. If the administration is serious about border security, and they should be serious about border security, just like the Senate of the United States and the House of Representatives of the United States should be serious about border security, we should reopen the rest of the government, and officials should also come back to the Hill like they did in February and brief members of both parties in Congress about what is needed and exactly the new border security money, how it will be spent. This week, the House has been voting on a series, or will be on a series of funding bills that the Senate has already passed, many by a vote of 92-6. Think about that. As I travel around the state, I tell people all the time what I saw last year in my first year is that there is so much more bipartisanship that is seen in this body that you don't see just by watching C-SPAN and listening to dueling press conferences. There's a lot of it that goes on, and we passed those bills 92-6. These bills will ensure the federal employees and contractors go back to work, they get paid, that food assistance and housing vouchers can go forward, that vital research can be done, that our parks and museums can reopen, that our airports are safe and our prisons are monitored. It ensures that instead of handing political appointees a 10% raise, we pay the Coast Guard, who continue to serve throughout the shutdown without knowing if their next paycheck is going to come. Mr. President, I'm sad to say, and I really hope people will take this into account, especially folks that have been here for a long time. It is sad to say that in my first year here, my first year in the Senate, this is the third government shutdown that we have seen. We should be embarrassed about that. The administration should be embarrassed about that. At every opportunity, I have voted to keep the government open. I can't say that I will do it every time because it will depend on the circumstances. But thus far, I have done all I can to keep this government open. And the American people are frustrated and disheartened by the dysfunction and empty rhetoric that they hear out of this town. But we have to remember that the Senate of the United States has done its job and done so in a deliberative and bipartisan way. No one on either side of the political aisle should lose sight of that. We came together and found common ground, and we should insist that the President of the United States not only acknowledge that, but honor that. Get this government up and running, and let's sit down to continue to discuss the plans for the border security that we all know is necessary and we would like. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.